Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are jumping into a fascinating stack of sources, all centered around a surprisingly common challenge. How do you navigate disagreements and perhaps even change someone's mind without causing a conflict or making an enemy?
It's a tricky one.
It really is. Our core material zeroes in on one specific powerful idea,
Yeah,
avoiding the urge to tell people they are wrong.
right. That immediate reaction.
Exactly. So our mission in this deep dive is to understand exactly why our gut reaction to correct someone usually backfires and, well, to uncover the much more effective diplomatic approaches these sources reveal.
Makes sense.
This deep dive is specifically for you, designed to give you a shortcut to being well-informed on a fundamental human interaction challenge. Let's unpack this.
Okay, so let's dive straight into that core problem the material identifies. It makes a very, very strong case that directly telling someone they are wrong is almost guaranteed to be counterproductive.
Yeah, and it's not just the actual words, "you're wrong," right? It's the way you do it, too.
Oh, definitely.
You can signal it with a look,
Yeah.
your tone of voice,
Mhm.
maybe a dismissive gesture, and the moment you do that, bam, resistance. Their defenses are instantly up.
Exactly. The source really emphasizes why this happens. It feels like a direct attack on their intelligence, their judgment,
Their pride.
their pride, even their self-respect.
Yeah.
And when someone feels attacked like that, their immediate impulse isn't to think, oh, maybe they have a point. It's to push back, to defend themselves.
So it's like logic just flies right out the window at that point.
Yeah.
The sources mention you could come armed with all the logic of a Plato or an Immanuel Kant,
Wow, okay.
and it still wouldn't matter because you bruised their ego,
And think about how we sometimes approach these situations, announcing you're going to prove something to someone.
Oh, yeah.
That's basically like throwing down a gauntlet, isn't it? It says, I'm smarter than you are, and you've set up this battle before you've even presented your first point.
Which just makes the already difficult task of changing someone's mind exponentially harder. It's tough enough as it is.
What's fascinating here, though, is that this isn't some new problem. Our sources bring in wisdom from some incredible figures throughout history who really understood this dynamic, almost implicitly.
They really do. It makes you pause when you read about someone as distinguished as Theodore Roosevelt, admitting that in his entire life, he only expected to be right about, 75% of the time?
Right. I mean, if Theodore Roosevelt wasn't certain he was always right, how can any of us be?
Exactly.
The material uses this great analogy. If you could be sure you were right just 55% of the time, you could make millions on Wall Street every day.
Huh, good point.
So if that level of certainty is rare even in the markets, why do we feel so confident telling others they're definitively wrong in these complex human interactions?
It really puts things into perspective. And the sources also point to figures like Alexander Pope,
Yeah.
who suggested teaching others in a way that feels like they're discovering it themselves or presenting new ideas as if they were just, forgotten truths.
And Galileo's famous line is perfect here. You cannot teach a man anything. You can only help him to find it within himself.
Powerful. Then there's Lord Chesterfield advising his son, basically, be wiser than other people, sure, but whatever you do, don't tell them so.
Keep it to yourself a bit.
Yeah. Even Socrates, the great questioner, repeatedly stated, one thing only I know, and that is that I know nothing.
All these historical heavyweights, they understood that humility and a subtle approach are just far more effective than direct confrontation or claiming absolute certainty.
And this historical wisdom leads directly to the central recommendation the sources highlight this power of admitting you might be wrong.
Yes, this is presented as the magic phrase almost.
Right.
Instead of confronting someone head-on with "you're wrong," the suggested approach is to start with something like, well, now look, I thought otherwise, but I may be wrong. I frequently am, and if I am wrong, I want to be put right. Let's examine the facts.
The sources actually call this magic, positive magic. And when you think about it psychologically, it totally disarms the other person, doesn't it?
It really does.
How can they argue with you saying you might be wrong and you simply want to look at the facts together?
Exactly. It instantly takes the confrontational heat out of the situation. And often, by showing that humility and openness, you can actually inspire the other person to mirror that behavior.
Huh, interesting.
They might become just as fair-minded and willing to consider that they, too, might not have all the pieces.
But why is our initial reaction so strong? And why is admitting we might be wrong so effective? The material really digs into the psychology behind this resistance, citing thinkers like James Harvey Robinson.
Right, Robinson's work, particularly The Mind in the Making, it sheds light on how easily we sometimes change our minds on, trivial stuffs.
Sure.
But the moment someone tells us we're wrong, we instinctively resent it and just dig in our heels. We might be careless in forming a belief, but we develop this sort of illicit passion for it the second it's challenged.
So it's not necessarily the idea itself that's so precious,
Not always, no.
but our ego. Our self-esteem feels threatened. Robinson points out the power of that little word, my house, my car, my opinion. Any doubt cast upon any of our assumptions feels like a personal attack. Our so-called reasoning often just becomes a way to find arguments to support what we already decided.
And Carl Rogers, the psychologist, adds another crucial layer here. He observed On Becoming a Person that our immediate, almost automatic reaction to someone else's statement is typically evaluation or judgment.
That's right. That's stupid.
Exactly, I disagree. We evaluate instead of simply trying to understand the meaning of the statement from the other person's perspective. He suggests we actually have to permit ourselves to truly understand.
Wow. These psychological insights explain perfectly why just barraging someone with facts or logic doesn't always work. You're not just up against a different viewpoint. You're up against these deep-seated psychological defenses tied to self-image and established beliefs.
Absolutely. Let's maybe look at how this plays out in real life. The sources offer some really concrete examples of this principle in action, showing both the failures and, well, the successes.
Yeah, the Supreme Court story is a pretty stark reminder of what happens when you ignore this. There's this young New York attorney, Mr. Ezrai, arguing a case.
Right, Lustgarten v. Fleet Corporation.
That's the one. A justice made a comment about the statute of limitations, a point Mr. S. knew the justice was mistaken on.
And the attorney, certain he was right, just bluntly stated that the justice was wrong.
Oof. The reaction was immediate and chilling. Apparently, a hush fell on the court. The temperature seemed to drop to zero.
Wow.
He was factually correct. He argued his case well otherwise, but he failed to persuade because he committed the enormous blunder of telling a very learned and famous man that he was wrong.
Yeah, not a good move.
Right.
Contrast that with Harold Ranke, a Dodge dealer facing unhappy customers. He adopted a completely different approach.
How so?
Instead of being defensive or trying to prove customers wrong, he started by saying something like, "Our dealership has made so many mistakes that I am frequently ashamed. We may have erred in your case. Tell me about it."
How brilliant is that? It completely disarmed those customers, you'd think.
Totally. Once they had a chance to air their grievances and felt heard, they became far more reasonable. Some even thanked him for his understanding attitude.
No way.
And 2 customers were so impressed they actually brought in friends to buy cars from him. This shift in approach helped him significantly in a competitive market.
That's a great story.
The sources also share a relatable personal anecdote about buying draperies.
Draperies, okay.
Yeah. When one friend criticized the price as awful, casting doubt on the purchase, the immediate reaction was defensiveness, like, what do you know?
Sure, I get that.
But later, when another friend just admired the draperies, didn't mention price, it was easy to admit, yeah, maybe I did pay too much for these.
Huh. It shows that if we're treated gently, we might be willing to admit we made a mistake, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes even feel a strange sense of pride in our frankness.
Exactly. But try to forcefully ram the unpalatable fact down our esophagus, as the source puts it,
Love that phrase.
and we will fight back.
No.
We also see the failure of the confrontational approach in historical conflicts, like Horace Greeley's bitter and argumentative campaign against Lincoln's policies.
Right.
All his arguments and abuse never made Lincoln change his mind, apparently.
And this is where Benjamin Franklin provides such a powerful model. The sources highlight his autobiography.
Oh, Franklin's great on this.
Yeah, he recounts the stinging rebuke from an old Quaker friend about his argumentative nature. And this feedback led Franklin to make a conscious, really drastic change.
He decided to forbear all direct contradiction and all positive assertion. He even went as far as avoiding words like certainly or undoubtedly,
Wow.
opting instead for softer phrases like I conceive, I apprehend, I imagine, or simply stating it so appears to me at present.
So when someone said something he knew was wrong, he denied himself that immediate satisfaction of correcting them.
Pretty much. Instead, he would respond by saying that while their opinion might be right in certain cases, it appeared different to him in this particular case. Very subtle.
That takes discipline.
It does. But the benefits he noted were almost immediate. His conversations became much more pleasant, his opinions were better received, he felt less embarrassment when he was proven wrong,
That's a good point, too.
and he found it significantly easier to persuade others to give up their mistaken viewpoints. He credited this deliberate habit, second only to his integrity, for his significant influence in public life, despite not being, a naturally gifted public speaker.
It's incredible. The sources give us two more specific business examples that really drive home the power of this shift, from direct confrontation to diplomacy.
Right. Consider Catherine A. Allred, an industrial engineering supervisor. Initially, she tried to convince management to adopt her new incentive system by proving their old one was wrong and hers was right. Standard approach, right?
Yeah, sounds familiar.
She ran into a brick wall. She spent all her energy defending her position, leaving management no space to acknowledge the flaws in their current system. The whole initiative just died.
Okay. So
Yeah.
what changed?
Well, after learning this principle, she tried again, called another meeting, but this time, instead of telling them, she asked them.
Ask them what?
Asked them where they felt their problems were with the current system. They talked through the issues, she actively sought their opinions, and then, with careful, low-keyed suggestions, she allowed them to basically develop her system themselves.
So they felt ownership.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The result, they enthusiastically accepted the system because they felt it was theirs. She learned that directly telling people they're wrong doesn't just hurt their pride, it closes the door to collaboration and makes you pretty unwelcome.
Makes perfect sense. And the other example, the lumber salesman.
Yeah, R.V. Crowley. He used to get into arguments with lumber inspectors and would often technically win the argument, but he lost thousands of dollars in business because inspectors, much like baseball umpires, are unlikely to reverse a decision after you've challenged their authority directly.
Okay, so he had a problem.
A big one. Facing a large rejection of lumber, Crowley decided to change his tactics drastically. He went to the plant, asked them to keep unloading, and asked the inspector to lay out the rejected pieces.
So far, so good.
He watched the inspector, noticed he was being maybe overly strict, didn't seem very experienced with the white pine Crowley specialized in, but crucially, Crowley offered no objection at all initially.
Just observed.
Exactly. Instead, he started asking quiet questions about why specific pieces weren't satisfactory. He emphasized that he just wanted to understand so they could ensure future shipments met the firm's exact needs. He even stated that the inspectors were right to reject boards unsuitable for their specific purpose.
That's clever, validating their role.
Right. By maintaining this friendly, cooperative tone and asking questions rather than making statements, the tension just eased. He casually mentioned that some pieces were technically within grade for white pine, but perhaps their particular requirements needed a more expensive grade.
Suggesting a path forward, subtly.
Totally. This subtle approach completely shifted the inspector's attitude. He admitted his inexperience with white pine, started asking Crowley questions, began to feel a bit guilty, maybe, about rejecting perfectly good wood.
Turn around.
And eventually realized the mistake was on their company's part for not specifying a higher grade initially.
Wow. And the outcome.
The incredible outcome was that the inspector, after Crowley left, went through the carload again, accepted the entire lot, and the company received full payment. Crowley saved thousands of dollars and maintained a valuable business relationship, all by choosing diplomacy over direct contradiction. The sources even briefly touch on how figures like Martin Luther King Jr. were effective partly by appealing to opponents' own stated principles, and how General Robert E. Lee focused on giving an honest opinion when asked by the president about an officer, rather than getting bogged down in his own feelings about that officer's opinion of him.
So different context, but similar underlying idea. Focus on the goal, use diplomacy, don't make it personal.
Exactly. All these stories, from ancient kings and philosophers to modern salespeople and engineers, they all circle back to that simple, powerful core principle.
Yeah. It's echoed in King Aktoi's advice to his son over 4,000 years ago. Be diplomatic. It will help you gain your point.
And in Jesus' teaching from 2,000 years ago, agree with thine adversary quickly, or, approach them with a willingness to find common ground, basically.
So the sources really distill this timeless wisdom into a clear directive. Don't argue, don't tell them they're wrong, and don't provoke their defensiveness. Choose diplomacy instead.
This deep dive really highlights that the goal isn't just about winning an argument, is it? It's about communicating effectively, maintaining positive relationships, and ultimately achieving your objectives without damaging someone's pride or turning them into an opponent.
It's fundamentally about showing genuine respect for another person's perspective, even when you are absolutely certain they are mistaken. As the material explicitly states, that's the key takeaway. Principle 2. Show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say, "you're wrong."
Yeah. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, really internalizing and practicing this principle can profoundly improve your interactions in every part of your life at work, with family, in your community, anywhere, really.
So this deep dive has definitely shown us that our natural impulse to correct others, that direct route, is often the least effective path.
And the sources offer a compelling alternative. Lead with humility, practice diplomacy, try to understand first, and show respect for the other person's viewpoint regardless of whether you agree with it.
It seems like such a simple idea, but clearly a profoundly powerful one, validated by psychology and, well, millennia of human experience.
Which raises an important question, maybe, for you listening to consider after this deep dive. Where in your own life, perhaps in a challenging relationship or a recurring conflict, might adopting the approach of, well, I may be wrong, let's examine the facts, or even Benjamin Franklin's gentle method of suggestion have the most significant positive impact? Something to think about.